Imagine waking up to realize that everything you thought you knew about the ancient world was little more than a collection of well-funded fairy tales. For decades, we have looked at the Great Pyramids, the stone faces of Easter Island, and the fossilized remains of prehistoric beasts as settled facts. We trusted the textbooks and the black and white documentaries that told us exactly how our ancestors lived and died. But then came 2025. This was the year that the polished veneer of archaeology finally began to crack under the weight of new technology and a younger generation of skeptical researchers. From high-tech radar revealing what might be hidden cities to DNA tests that turned princesses into commoners, the past year has been a non-stop cycle of oops and we lied. We aren't just finding new things, yet we are actively deleting the mistakes of the past. The scale of these corrections is massive. We are talking about mysteries that have stood for nearly 100 years suddenly falling apart because someone decided to look a little closer with an ultraviolet camera or a drone. It turns out that some of our most famous artifacts were painted over to look better for museum crowds, and some of our most dramatic battlefields were actually just peaceful cemeteries. As we dive into these 9 incredible mysteries that were finally solved or debunked in 2025, you'll start to see a pattern. History isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes it's written by people who were just guessing and didn't want to admit they were wrong. The secret city beneath the sands. Well, if you spent any time on social media over the last 12 months, you likely saw the headlines that nearly broke the internet. Claims started circulating that an entire multi-level city had been discovered directly beneath the Giza plateau, specifically under the Pyramid of Khafra. The rumors were fueled by satellite radar scans and a series of cryptic press conferences that suggested we had finally found the Hall of Records, or a lost civilization's bunker. People were sharing AI-generated images of glowing corridors and high-tech chambers, claiming that the Egyptian government was trying to suppress the greatest discovery of all time. But as the dust settled in late 2025, the reality turned out to be much more grounded and a bit more controversial. The discovery was based on synthetic aperture radar data, a technology that is incredible at mapping the surface of planets, but notoriously bad at looking through hundreds of feet of solid limestone. Experts in the field of geophysics stepped forward to explain that the geometric pathways and deep cylindrical shafts were likely just natural fissures in the rock, or more likely, errors in how the data was processed. Even more shocking was the background of the team behind the claims. Instead of traditional Egyptologists, the group included a specialist in organic chemistry with a history of defending UFO theories. While the idea of a secret city is the ultimate high-retention story, the scientific community officially pulled the plug on this mystery, labeling it a mix of wishful thinking and misunderstood tech. The accounting holes of the Andes. High in the Peruvian Andes, and there is a scar on the Earth that has baffled hikers and historians since it was first photographed from the air in the 1930s. Known as the Band of Holes, it consists of over 5,000 individual pits carved into the rocky soil of Serpent Mountain. For years, the theories were wild. Some claimed they were individual graves for a massacred army. Others suggested they were astronomical markers, or even pits used for human sacrifice to appease the mountain gods. Because they look so uniform and intentional, many people even leaned into the ancient alien theory, suggesting they were part of a landing strip or a massive machine. In 2025, the mystery was finally put to rest, and the answer was far more human than anyone expected. The researchers using drones and soil analysis found traces of maize and bulrush fibers inside the holes. It turns out this wasn't a temple or a graveyard, it was a massive open-air ledger and warehouse system. During the rise of the Chincha Kingdom and later the Inca Empire, these holes were used to measure and store tribute. Each block of holes represented a different group or village, and the pits were used to count exactly how much grain or cloth was being paid to the state. It was essentially a mountain-sized Excel spreadsheet made of dirt. It might not be as spooky as a sacrificial pit, but it reveals a society that was incredibly organized and obsessed with taxes, proving that some things never change. The dinosaur made of paint. Paleontology isn't immune to these scandals either. For nearly a century, a fossil known as Tridenosaurus antiquus was considered a holy grail of evolution. Found in the Italian Alps in 1931, it appeared to show a small, lizard-like creature with its soft tissues and skin perfectly preserved as a dark silhouette. It was used in dozens of scientific papers to explain how early reptiles evolved. However, a team of researchers in 2025 decided to put the fossil under a microscope and hit it with ultraviolet light. What they found was both hilarious and heartbreaking for the scientific community. The perfectly preserved skin wasn't organic material at all. It was black industrial paint. Someone, likely shortly after the fossil was discovered in the 30s, he had carved a lizard shape around some poorly preserved bones and then painted it black to make it look complete and more impressive for museum display. For 93 years, scientists were literally studying a craft project. While there are real bones hidden under the pigment, the entire miracle of preservation was a total fraud. This revelation sent shockwaves through museums worldwide, leading to a massive re-examination of other too-good-to-be-true fossils that might just be a coat of paint away from being debunked. The Princess Who Was a Boy. The story of Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe IV, is one of ancient history's great tragedies. She was the political rival of the famous queen, eventually executed at the orders of Mark Antony to keep Cleopatra's throne secure. For decades, a skull found in a beautiful octagonal tomb in Ephesus was paraded around as the definitive remains of the lost princess. It was the only piece of the Ptolemaic royal family we thought we had. Documentaries were made about her reconstructed face, and historians used the skull to guess at Cleopatra's own ethnic background. But 2025 brought a cold, hard dose of DNA reality. Advanced testing on the remains revealed two things that changed everything. First, the skull belonged to a young boy, not a woman. Second, the child suffered from Treacher-Collins syndrome, a rare genetic condition that affects facial development. The princess we had been studying for a century didn't even exist. Yet this leaves us with a much deeper mystery. Why was a young boy with a severe physical deformity given a royal burial in one of the most prominent monuments in Ephesus? It seems we've traded a solved mystery for a much more haunting one. The massacre that never happened. In the United Kingdom, Maiden Castle has always been the site of a legendary bloody stand. The story went that when the Roman legions invaded, they stormed this massive hill fort and slaughtered the British tribes inside. Archaeologists in the 1930s found dozens of skeletons with horrific wounds, including one with a Roman catapult bolt stuck in its spine. It was the ultimate story of heroic resistance against a foreign invader. However, in 2025, a massive radiocarbon dating project revealed that these people didn't die in a single battle. In fact, their deaths were spread out over 50 years. The battlefield was actually just a long-standing cemetery. While the injuries were real, they likely came from local skirmishes between rival British tribes long before the Romans ever showed up. The famous Roman bolt was likely a local spear tip, and the story of the Great Massacre was largely a narrative created in the 1930s to boost British morale during the build-up to World War II. The history books are currently being rewritten to reflect that Maiden Castle was a place of community and burial, not just a scene of Roman cruelty. The Rapa Nui Innovation Hub. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, has long been the poster child for societal collapse. The story we were all told was that the islanders were totally isolated. You cut down all their trees to move their giant moai statues, and eventually turned on each other in a desperate civil war. It was a cautionary tale about environmental destruction and isolation. But new evidence from 2025 suggests that the people of Rapa Nui were never the hermits we thought they were. By analyzing the design of ritual platforms across the Pacific, researchers found that Rapa Nui was actually a hub of innovation. Instead of just receiving ideas from other islands, the people of Rapa Nui were traveling and exporting their architectural styles to other cultures. The collapse narrative has been largely debunked. It turns out they were a resilient seafaring people who maintained contact with the outside world for centuries. The giant statues weren't the cause of their downfall. Now they were a symbol of a culture so successful that its influence spread across thousands of miles of ocean. The AI Pyramid Scandal. Indonesia's Gunung Padang was the site of the most viral archaeological claim of 2025. A study suggested that a mountain in West Java was actually the world's oldest pyramid, built over 25,000 years ago. This would have rewritten the entire history of human civilization, placing a high-tech society in Indonesia while the rest of the world was still in the Stone Age. The mystery was solved when the original scientific paper was retracted following an outcry from the global archaeological community. Even worse, it was discovered that the most convincing images of chambers and amphitheaters inside the hill were actually AI-generated or heavily manipulated. Yet geologists confirmed that the pyramid is actually a natural volcano with stone terraces built on top much later, around 100 BC. It's a significant site, but it's not a 25,000-year-old superstructure. This serves as a massive warning for the future of archaeology. In the age of generative AI, we have to be more careful than ever about what we believe. The mummy's final secret. Finally, we have the pregnant mummy. A few years ago, researchers in Poland claimed to have found the first ever pregnant Egyptian mummy. They even diagnosed her with terminal cancer, making her the most medically dramatic mummy in existence. It was a heart-wrenching story that made headlines globally. In 2025, a reanalysis of over 1,300 CT scans proved that the fetus was actually just bundles of embalming rags and salt that had shifted over time. Furthermore, the cancerous lesions on her skull were identified as simple damage caused by the metal hooks used to pull her brain out during the mummification process. She wasn't a tragic mother-to-be, she was just a young woman who had been prepared for the afterlife with standard, albeit slightly messy, Egyptian techniques. It was a classic case of scientists seeing what they wanted to see rather than what was actually there. 2025 was the year we realized that the past is a lot more human and a lot less movie-like than we assumed. We found out that our ancestors were obsessed with taxes, that museum curators in the 30s liked to use black paint, and that AI can trick even the smartest experts. These discoveries don't make history less interesting. They make it more real. It reminds us that we should always keep questioning the settled truths, because the next big reveal could be just one scan away. If you want to keep digging into the truth behind the world's most enduring legends, make sure to stay tuned. There are still thousands of files waiting to be opened. Would you like me to dive deeper into any of these scandals? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth is always buried deeper than you think. This has been Mysteries Uncovered Files.